All of us strive to be better at something. Like, I strive to be good and get better at a lot of things. Ocarina, being a good person, things like that. But it's really easy to make your goal being perfect, which in reality will keep you from improving. Let me explain. For a lot of my life, I've tried foremost to be as perfect as possible, and in things like school, that was possible. There's a grade, you could get an A on a test, perfect attendance, participate in extracurriculars, etc., etc. But school, as important as it is not the real world. It's important, but it's not the real world. And that's a lot more complicated. I get in frequent ruts because of that outdated, not good perfectionist mindset. And here are ways that I'm understanding it and ways that I'm working to be less of a perfectionist and more of a good enough-tionist. I should coin that term, put it in the dictionary. Good enough-tionist, yes. We'll start with a quick story. Almost 5 years ago, in my second year of college, I went to the gym 5 days a week and was in the absolute best shape of my life. I was in really, really good shape. I had rippling muscles. I weighed about 40 pounds less than I do now. I was in really good shape. And I recently stumbled upon one of my progress photos from back then, and my first thought was like, damn, I really wish I looked like that again. I looked perfect. But then the more I thought about it, I remembered that even back then, I wished that I looked better, less fat, more muscle, whatever. Like just a total, I wanted to be like a perfect specimen, whatever. Even back then, I felt insecure about my own body and didn't think it was good enough because I was striving to be perfect. When seeking perfection, there is a constant, unforgettable gap between where you are and where you want to be. Now that I'm not in my best shape, where I wanted to be was 19-year-old Andy, but 19-year-old Andy wanted to be a frankly near impossible body image, something that I feasibly could not do unless I devoted my entire life to fitness. That gap is really toxic. Constantly thinking about that gap between where you are versus where you want to be is one of the most discouraging things. You're not going to suddenly get that big change, that amazing result in an instant. So why focus on that result? Focus on what you can do right now and what you can control. Just like you have control over hitting like and subscribing. If your desired result is perfection, how do you get there? You can't. You can influence results, but you can't control them. You can only control the process and the actions you take to go towards a certain direction, but you don't control the destination. I do have a goal to lose around 45 pounds, get in shape again, but I don't control the results of that. I control the actions that I take every day to get closer to that. These actions can influence the likelihood of it happening with the process I take to get there, but I, and really no one, ultimately control the result. My process is nowhere near perfect, but I'm eating a cleaner diet, logging my calories, and doing a consistent exercise routine, and things like that. I'm still slipping up, but I'm much less focused on what I can't control and more focused on what I can control, which is the process. I'm still a recovering perfectionist, and the slow progress and lack of immediate results makes it really hard to stay consistent. But I keep reminding myself that it's the process that gets you to a goal, not just hoping that you get to that goal. It's like that one study that everyone quotes about that one pottery class. Half the students were assigned to just make one perfect specimen piece of art, pottery, etc., while the other half were assigned to make as many pots as possible. Can you guess which half of the class had the better final vase for their final grade? It's of course the students who kept making them, made mistakes, and were okay with that. They learned by doing it, constantly iterating and building on their process. The students whose goal was to make one perfect vase could really only hope for that result because they had such little control of the process and improvement as artists. You don't get better by hoping to make one perfect thing. You get better by making a lot of things, developing a process, and getting better and better and better from that. You don't achieve a goal by hoping for it. You have to do something. And focus on the things you can control that generally put you in the right direction. Process is greater than result. But Andy, you talk all about the process. Can't you go down a perfectionist rabbit hole with that too? Yup. Many times I have tried to implement good habits in my life, and my leftover perfectionism dreams far too big for any of these habits and makes them far too complex, and it makes it extremely difficult to stick to these things. The big macro level meta idea that I'm working on to get over this is just the belief that good enough is good enough. I'm not saying to do just the bare minimum, not try, etc. But there are so many areas in your life where good enough is far more than enough. And if you're striving to be perfect, you won't do anything at all. And so to expand that idea, we can say good enough to generally be better in the long run or within a specific context. With fitness, I'm realizing that it's far better for me to work out 10 to 30 minutes a day for like an intense strength workout than to do some crazy hour-long routine, go to the gym every single day, etc., things like that. The 10 to 30 minute workout is good enough, and I'm getting stronger, I'm feeling healthier, and I'm continually getting better. With my diet, I don't need to cut out every single food I enjoy. I just need to be under my calorie limit more days than I'm not. It's also good enough, and I am slowly losing some weight. Health, fitness, etc. aside, with the ocarina, I don't need to be the best musician or a perfect ensemble member in Okabanda or anywhere else. I'm good enough to have some authority to talk about the ocarina, and good enough to play in these ensembles. Don't worry about being the best. Be good enough to generally be better in the long run, or be good enough for a particular context. On that note of being good enough for a particular context, don't make that context like good enough to get 100%, because then it's just perfectionism in different clothing. Make the context like, okay, be good enough to get like at least an A- on a test, be good enough to lose 2 pounds a month. I mean, that's still based on result, but if you make it manageable, then adding a context for good enough makes it good enough. Like with work, nobody's going to be a perfect employee all the time, and I don't put that pressure on myself. I put my pressure to be good enough to be a very good employee. Like I meet almost all of my deadlines all the time outside of extenuating circumstances. I attend all the meetings that I need to attend. I try to do everything in timely, communicative manner, and that's more than good enough to be an employee. But if you set your goal to be like, oh, I must be the absolute most productive, crush all my goals, 10x everything, just stuff like that, it's toxic. You need to make it manageable. Make the context that you're hoping for manageable. I'm good enough to be a very good employee, and I'm happy about that. I don't need to be good enough to be a perfect employee. But anyways, that's enough on the context. That's a little tangent that wasn't in the script. Perfectionism is also the cause of many people's procrastination. I actually just retweeted a Twitter thread about this. Check my Twitter at Ocarina of Andy, and you can look at that. I didn't write it, somebody else did, but you'll find that via my Twitter. Procrastination is not the fear of failure. It's the fear of success and holding yourself to a higher standard. Perfectionism causes a lot of people to set that standard far too high for a task or a habit, which makes doing the thing a monumentally difficult task alone. While it's really good to strive to do your best, no one is operating at their best every minute of every day. Like, most people probably are at peak productivity like 2 hours a day. When you strive to be good enough to make progress, good enough for a certain context, or simply good enough to get something done in the first place, you're making progress. If you're stopping yourself from trying just because you want to be perfect, you're procrastinating and not making progress. For example, for years, I've tried to build a habit of reading, but my perfectionist vision of what that reading habit should look like made me procrastinate on doing it in the first place. I wanted to go from reading very irregularly to reading an entire book a week, and that's way too big a change to just suddenly flip a switch on like that and do so sustainably. What I'm doing now is working much better. I'm just reading when I can at all. Even if it's just 5 minutes before I go to bed, if I just read at least once a day, then it's good enough. And if I miss a day, I'm not going to beat myself up over it because I'm still in the long run making progress. If I go from reading 0 times a week to 5 days a week, I'm still good enough because I'm reading at all during the week. If I miss a day or two, it's not like, oh no, habit broken, I'm going to beat myself up and then never do it again. It's just, okay, I missed a day, time to get back on it the next day. No big deal. And these micro reading sessions of 5 to 12, 20 minutes have gotten me more than halfway through a book in a week and a half, just by doing a tiny bit a day, like the absolute bare minimum to call it a habit. Do the thing. Give a good effort, and what happens, happens. Discard your perfectionist vision for a task or habit, and do what you can. It'll take you a lot further than doing nothing. In conclusion, while perfectionism can be very important for some areas, like surgery, it shouldn't take over your daily life. Don't try to be perfect when you don't have to be. The gap between where you are and where you want to be can be incredibly discouraging if it doesn't feel like you're close enough to reaching it. I feel it now with fitness, and when I was in the best shape of my life, I still felt it, and I still did not feel perfect enough with that area of my life. To combat the discouragement of perfectionism, instead of focusing on things you can't control, like the result, focus on the things you can control, like the process. And keep it just good enough. Don't make it too big or too unsustainable to do on a regular basis. A total overhaul of your life is not sustainable. But a slow, gradual, good enough one is. And that will ultimately end up totally overhauling your life, just in a slower, more sustainable process. And it's far, far more than doing nothing. If I did 10 push-ups a day, that would take me so much further than doing nothing a day. And just the tiny steps make such a big impact. You'll also have the added bonus of overcoming procrastination, just because if you focus on being perfect, then you're not going to get something done. It'll be too intimidating. But if you just focus on doing it, getting it done, doing a good enough job for a context, then it's much less scary and it's much easier to start. I'm applying this to fitness, other habits I want to build, and even YouTube, because you improve with small steps, not focusing on perfection. Not every video I make will be an absolute banger, and I won't suddenly have hundreds of thousands of subscribers just because I hope for it. I just can do what I can do and work to be good enough to gradually be better in the long run. I have a lot of work to do to overcome my perfectionist mentality, but I hope some of what I'm doing helps you too. Leave a like if you enjoyed the video, subscribe for more, and I'd love to hear your thoughts. Bye-bye!